one fatally, and 2 in critical condition. I've just spent time speaking to the families, and I want to offer my prayers and the prayers of all 13 million Pennsylvanians for the 2 individuals who are being treated at this time. We lost a fellow Pennsylvanian last night, Corey Comparator. I just spoke to Corey's wife and Corey's 2 daughters. Corey was a girl dad. Corey was a firefighter. Corey went to church every Sunday. Corey loved his community, and most especially, Corey loved his family. Corey was an avid supporter of the former president and was so excited to be there last night with him in the community. I asked Corey's wife if it would be okay for me to share that we spoke. She said yes. She also asked that I share with all of you that Corey died a hero, that Corey dove on his family to protect them last night at this rally. Corey was the very best of us. May his memory be a blessing. Last night was shocking for this community and for this Commonwealth, and I know for this country. Political disagreements can never, ever be addressed through violence. Disagreements are okay, but we need to use a peaceful political process to settle those differences. This is a moment where all leaders have a responsibility to speak and act with moral clarity, where all leaders need to take down the temperature and rise above the hateful rhetoric that exists and search for a better, brighter future for this nation. It's the work that I try to do every day here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that's the work that falls to each and every American right now. And so I ask that you join me in prayer for the 2 Pennsylvanians who are in critical condition, that we continue to wish for a full and speedy recovery and pray for the former president, and that the Comparator family remains in our thoughts and prayers. They have some very challenging times ahead of them. They will have an empty seat at the dinner table for the rest of their lives, but we need to make sure that Corey's memory is forever a blessing. And here in Pennsylvania, we will see to it that that is the case. And with that, I'll be happy to try and take a few of your questions.
Governor, a lot of folks are starting to ask the tough question about whether that building that the shooter accessed should have been secured. Should it have been secured? And do the Pennsylvania State Police have any responsibility to have secured it?
I'm not going to get into any questions, answer any questions regarding the ongoing investigation. I trust that the FBI and the Pennsylvania State Police will keep you posted throughout the day and in the days ahead as to their investigation.
Governor, there were some concerning items that the police had found in the suspect's vehicle. Do you have any update on those? And are you confident at this point the threat is over, that he acted alone and that the public is in fact safe?
The investigation is ongoing, and law enforcement will update you on the status of their investigation throughout the day.
Can you share any more about your communications with former President Donald Trump or his team?
I have not spoken directly to the former president. I have wished him well. I think multiple times last evening through statements Lori and I have. The people of Pennsylvania, I know, were praying for him. And again, according to his team and himself, it seems as though he will be fine, obviously, relatively speaking. And we're glad to see that. Violence is never acceptable. I should also let you know that I did speak to President Biden. He called me last night to make sure that here in the Commonwealth we had all the resources we needed. I assured him that we did. At the time, he had yet to speak to President Trump. I think they connected later in the evening, and he wanted me to know that he was trying to reach out to the former president. I think that that was the honorable and right thing to do, and I'm glad that President Biden did that. We have no unmet needs at this time, and we're working in concert with our federal partners, and I let the president know that.
Governor, have you talked to the families of those two who were critically injured, and do you have an update on their condition?
I spoke to the family of one of them, and the other left a detailed message, and I'm not going to get into their status. That'll be shared by the Pennsylvania State Police and or the family later today.
Governor, will you be asking for flags to be flown at half-staff across the state, and also knowing that this is going to be a really contentious, even more so, a battleground state for the rest of until you what would your message?
Can I say, I just missed the last part of what she said.
No problem. The first was about the flags. The second, knowing that this is going to be even more contentious now in the state of Pennsylvania and that we're divided here, what is your message to people who live here?
I have directed that flags be flown at half-staff in Corey's memory, and our chief of staff is working through that process now. My message to all Pennsylvanians, my message to all Americans is to be firm in your beliefs, to believe what you believe, to advocate for what you believe, and to be engaged in the political and civic process, but to always do so peacefully. To remember that while we may be Democrats or Republicans, above all else, we are Americans. And if you look at the story of this great nation over the last 248 years, a nation that was born right here in Pennsylvania, it's been ordinary Americans at every single step of the way, rising up, demanding more, seeking justice, advocating for change, and doing so peacefully. And those who have advocated for such change peacefully, they have been the ones to bring that about. We have to remember that even in these times where there are real divisions, that we have to address those divisions through engagement in the political and civic process in a peaceful manner. That is incumbent upon all political leaders of all parties, and it is incumbent upon the public. I will tell you that notwithstanding the tragedy that we saw last night here in Butler, the awful tragedy, that every day when I'm around Pennsylvania, I see the very best of Pennsylvanians. People who do have fervent beliefs, people who do have passionate beliefs, but who engage in a peaceful manner, and who love their neighbors, and who engage with people in their communities, even those that they might have differences from. We need to learn from our history in this Commonwealth and in this country, and we need to bring our better angels forward and carry that forward into this political season.
Governor,
I'll take one more. Yes.
Can you expand on the situation of Mr. Comptrore's passing? Was he standing behind President Trump? You said he dove in front of his family. Is there any more detail you can provide about
His
that?
wife shared with me that he dove on his family to protect them. As for any other information, that'll be shared by law enforcement. Thank you all very much.
Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania addressing reporters there in Butler Township less than 24 hours after the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. The governor of Pennsylvania saying he spoke with the victim who died, the supporter who died there from bullet wounds, describing him as a girl dad, a father of two girls, we believe. His name is Corey Compertor, according to the governor there just moments ago. He said he spoke with Corey's wife, who gave the governor permission to share with the country that her husband, a firefighter, died, she said, as a hero. He jumped on family members in the middle of that madness as it was playing out at the rally. I want to bring in our team members for some important questions, just to bring you up to date at home. Let's bring in our senior investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky, who is right there at the scene of the press conference. I know, Aaron, you asked moments ago about this fast-moving investigation, whether or not the governor would weigh in on what might have been discovered inside the suspect's car. And again, this is all moving very quickly. Let's bring our audience up to speed on what we know about the shooter.
We know the shooter was a 20-year-old local person from here in western Pennsylvania, David, and he was killed by a U.S. Secret Service sharpshooter, and that was after he was able to fire off about 8 rounds from an AR-style rifle from an elevated position, which in and of itself is concerning. There were some critical images captured by Doug Mills of the New York Times, the first of which appears to show a projectile passing by former President Trump, followed by a second image by Doug Mills of the New York Times, in which the former president appears to touch his ear And then you see in a third image, blood on the former president's hand. These are images among hundreds of others that law enforcement officials are now studying as they now try to find a motive for why this shooter did what he did. So far, David, we're told there has been no obvious motive, either through social media, but they're still going through it, including a Discord account, although that hasn't been terribly revealing from what law enforcement officials tell us. And David, here you heard the governor try to address the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who are rightly shocked, he said, by what occurred in their state. He said political disagreements can never be addressed with violence, but that's exactly what happened here on Saturday evening, David.
In fact, we heard the governor there tell not only the people of Pennsylvania, given the outsized role that that state plays in really all presidential elections and will again come this November, to advocate for what you believe in, but to do it peacefully. He encouraged all Americans to abide by that principle. You were talking about the suspect there moments ago. Really extraordinary images from the New York Times, for many very difficult to look at, as you can actually see the bullet coming in. And it's a lot of people, Aaron, in looking at that, know the video they saw from less than 24 hours ago, that it was the former president's right ear, and yet it looks like it's coming in from that side. So give us an idea of the relationship from where this suspect was. And again, he was outside the security perimeter, but remarkably close to this rally. And then part of the major questions going forward, how he was able to get on that rooftop with the Secret Service and state police tasked with securing that political rally.
And that rooftop, we're told, was searched and secure. So there is a nagging question about why that elevated position was available to this young man to fire off these rounds from the AR-style rifle. And the images are even possible because the photographers are brought up close in Trump's political rallies. So they were right there near the former president. It appears he was shot from less than 200 yards away. Our team has taken a look at some of the images and also the rooftop from where we believe the shooter was perched. And it appears to be about 130 yards away. So it was far too close for comfort. The Secret Service often has responsibility for the immediate vicinity around their protectee. Sometimes locations outside the security perimeter are outsourced to state and local law enforcement partners. The governor was asked here whether the Pennsylvania State Police bore any responsibility. The governor did not really entertain the question. He said that's going to be part of the investigation, and law enforcement is certainly asking, David.
We're looking at aerials now of those rooftops in question. And then, Aaron, just to underscore what you said there moments ago, that there had been a sweep at one point before the rally of that particular location?
That's what law enforcement officials are telling us, David, that they saw the rooftop, they knew its proximity, it had been swept or believed to have been secured, and law enforcement is now asking eyewitnesses to come forward, some of whom have been saying they saw the shooter with a gun, called out for help, and the U.S. Secret Service sharpshooter was able to take him out, but just seconds too late because he was already able to fire off those 8 rounds, which killed one Pennsylvania man, injured 2 others critically. And you heard the governor describe this man, Corey Comparator, who leaves behind a wife and 2 daughters. And the governor says that his wife said he dove on top of the family to try and protect them.
Aaron, you also showed our viewers the image there of the suspect just moments ago. This is believed to be an image from high school graduation of Thomas Matthew Crooks, who is or was 20, of course, now dead, taken down by the Secret Service.
He was shot by the U.S. Secret Service. He was 20 years old, from here in western Pennsylvania. And we've started to speak with those who graduated high school with him and who have not been terribly revealing about his character. Some said he was just normal. Some said he was a little lonely. Some said he was into computers. Some said he tried to join a rifle club. But there's no clear picture of who this young man was in his community that gives us any indication or predicate for why this may have occurred. And that's a nagging question for law enforcement at this hour, David. They've been scouring social media. We know they've talked to relatives. He has a sister, he has parents that the law enforcement is talking to. But so far, David, we still don't know why he did this.
And we understand, Aaron, that there was an AR-style weapon that was purchased legally.
A high-powered rifle purchased by his father, we're told. The authorities have been able to trace the bullets and the gun, and the gun purchase comes back to the suspect's father. We don't know the exact year. That hasn't been made public yet, but it does appear on its face to be a legal purchase. The authorities will certainly want to ask the father a little bit more about that gun, but it is the weapon of choice for many mass shootings, and because assuming the former president was in fact hit by a bullet, as he says he was, grazed in the ear, this would qualify as a mass shooting, 4 or more people shot. And so in addition to the nation's political violence, it's emblematic of another problem the U.S. faces, and that's chronic gun violence.
Aaron, we should mention the images we have on the screen now are apparently of a commercial that was shot during his high school years. The suspect, of course, as Aaron pointed out there, many questions and the investigation fast moving into his history. As Aaron just again reported, this was a high-powered AR-style weapon purchased legally, believed by the father or in the father's name some time ago. And, of course, those are all facts that will be very closely scrutinized as we hear from law enforcement throughout the day. The governor there, Josh Shapiro, moments ago saying we will hear from law enforcement at some point here this afternoon with likely significant updates here. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, because we have learned moments ago that President Biden will again address the nation. Mary?
David, we are told he will come before cameras again at 1:30, so in about an hour, 45 minutes from now, we expect to hear from the president. This comes after he spent the morning here at the White House in the Situation Room, being briefed by his Homeland Security team and other law enforcement officials. This will, though, be the first time that we've heard from the president since those brief remarks that he gave last night, shortly after this assassination attempt. And then, of course, the president issued a real forceful condemnation of this attack, saying that there is no place in this country for this kind of political violence. He said it is sick, and he called for the country to come together and try to unite. Of course, we know, though, that this comes at a point when this country is deeply, deeply divided. The president, though, trying to lower the political temperature. Shortly after that, late last night, the president did finally connect with Donald Trump, the two of them speaking on the phone in a call that's been described to me as good, respectful, but short. The president, first and foremost, is responding to this moment as president, but there are certainly lots of questions about how this will impact his campaign, how this will simply impact his travel in the upcoming days. We do now know that the vice president, who had an abortion event planned, a campaign event planned for Tuesday in Palm Beach County. Of course, that's Donald Trump's backyard. That has now been postponed. The president is supposed to be traveling tomorrow to Texas, then on to Nevada on Tuesday and Wednesday. Lots of questions still unanswered here, David, about how his schedule may change as well and how it will impact his campaign.
Certainly a dark new turn in what was already a deeply polarized campaign leading up to November. And Mary, you heard the governor there speak of this phone call that you just reported on. The country actually saw in that first debate both of these candidates coming out on the stage and not even shaking hands. Certainly after last night, and the governor said this moments ago, Josh Shapiro, that the president told him that he did intend to talk to former President Donald Trump, that was his plan. Continued to work into the night until that happened. And as you just reported, short, good, but brief. But what the governor there of Pennsylvania said, that was expected and that was the right thing to do in front of the nation.
And just the fact that they talked is so notable because, as you mentioned, they don't speak. These are not two men who we often ever see have any kind of contact. They rarely interacted, even when they were on the debate stage together. David, that was the first time that they had come face to face or even talked to each other in some 3.5 years. So the fact that the president is trying to reach out to Donald Trump is, again, another sign that he is showing or trying to show the American people that now is not a time for politics. We know that his campaign has really hit the pause button. They've pulled down all of their political communication, pulling their ads off of the airways, trying to really, lead and encourage the nation to sort of take a beat here. That even though we are now days away from the Republican National Convention, the president recognizing, what a really not just divisive, but what a tinderbox moment this could be for the country, and trying to just dial everything down, David.
And again, for our audience, Mary, when does the president plan to address the nation?
1:30 p.m., David, here from the Roosevelt Room at the White House. That is the expectation. All
right. You and I will be right here together to bring that to the country as well. Thank you, Mary. I want to bring in Pierre Thomas, our Chief Justice Correspondent. Pierre, you saw those images that Aaron had up on the screen there moments ago from Doug Mills at the New York Times. extraordinarily very specific and detailed images actually showing at least one of those bullets coming right towards the former president. His head was turned in that moment. It grazed, as we now know, his right ear. And of course, we've all seen the video where he then looks at his hand, likely notices the blood on his hand, and then goes down behind the podium to seek cover. But this is going to lead to, renewed questions here. There were immediate questions last night, but now nearly 24 hours later about how this young shooter propped on a rooftop nearby was able to get so many shots out before being taken down. Of course, the Secret Service is being thanked and law enforcement on the scene being thanked for their extraordinarily quick response. But as this investigation moves forward, the question now turns to, how on earth did the shooter get that many shots at all, but that many shots once he started?
Exactly, David. Law enforcement officials are looking at that very issue. We're told that police had gotten information from people in the crowd about some suspicious activity. They were in the process of pursuing, trying to find out about the suspicious activity. They were in the process of hunting for this individual. And my sources are telling me is that the Secret Service sniper who saw this person on top of the roof engaged after it was clear that shots were being fired, that this was an adversary. And we're told by our sources that this counter sniper was able to pinpoint him and then take him out with a shot from his rifle from a distance away. But again, the key here is that, as we reported earlier today, there was a clearing of the building. They thought that it was looked at earlier, that there was no one on top of the roof. But the key thing is somehow, at some point, that suspect was able to get on top of the roof and then start inching toward being able to make this shot. It was split-second decisions involved. And we're also getting additional information from the FBI, which is leading the investigation, David. They're telling us that, again, this appears to be a lone wolf situation. So far, no specific ties to any organization or any other individual. We're expecting that we will get a briefing from the FBI a bit later today, as they know that the public wants to know as much as they can about motive, whether there was anyone else involved. There's a computer, also a phone that they are trying to exploit. There is misinformation that they believe that this young man was consuming. They're trying to get a better understanding of that. But at present, no clear motive has been uncovered, David.
Pierre Thomas, our Chief Justice Correspondent. Pierre, our thanks to you. I want to bring in Rachel Scott, who, of course, was at that rally, covering Donald Trump's rally, as she has so often during this campaign when the shots began to ring out there. And Rachel, obviously, we deeply appreciate your reporting these last 24 hours. I want to try to look forward here if we can. Have you heard anything about how security will be different, really on both sides, for the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign, in terms of these obviously very public rallies and on the eve of the Republican National Convention?
David, I can tell you that in a memo obtained by ABC News, the Trump campaign laid out to its staff that they want their staff to start avoiding their offices in Washington, D.C. and also West Palm Beach right now, as they continue to heighten up these and beef up these security measures, enhance the security measures at those offices. They also, in that memo, were very direct as we talk about the political rhetoric, the rhetoric on both sides, saying flat out that any violent rhetoric will not be tolerated. That is a strong message from the head of the Trump campaign, the senior advisors of the Trump campaign, directly down to the staff. You know, there are big questions here about security. David, every Trump rally that we go to, I will tell you that we have to pass through magnetometers. Our bags are searched. There are certain restrictions on what you can bring in to those rallies. Frankly, it's one of the places where you probably feel the most secure because you're around law enforcement. You're around Secret Service. You know that the former president of the United States is there. So there are big questions about how exactly that suspected shooter, that suspected gunman, was able to get so close to the former president, less than 200 yards away, where he was able to fire those multiple rounds, David.
And we should mention that the concern leading up to November in these past few months has been a significant, Rachel, really for both campaigns, as far as the rhetoric in this country and the threat of potential political violence. You heard Mary report there that Vice President Kamala Harris, she had been scheduled to campaign in Florida early this week at an abortion rights rally, going to be a leading theme of that speech, and that's now been put on hold. I would gather likely because of security concerns and particularly what we've all witnessed as a nation in these last 24 hours.
Absolutely, David. And if we just even go back to January 6th, this country has been in this heightened state, on guard, as political rhetoric has just intensified on both sides. And we saw it on January 6th. We saw the outcome of that after the former president repeatedly denied that he lost the 2020 election. We saw rioters storm the Capitol. We saw the rhetoric that unfolded after that from Republicans. We know this is something that the Democratic Party is increasingly concerned about heading into this November election as this rematch occurs between former President Donald Trump and President Biden. But this is where it all has come to a head. And I think there is a moment here. And you heard from the governor, Josh Shapiro, there saying political disagreements must be addressed in a civil matter, almost pleading with the nation to take this seriously and lower the temperature. David?
No question. And that has been the call from former presidents across the board who came out saying they were glad to hear that the former president was okay as soon as they got word from the former president himself through social media. And Rachel, of course, from Governor Josh Shapiro moments ago, urging not only the people of Pennsylvania, where you are and have been the last 24 hours, but the people of the country to stick by their political convictions, to advocate for them, but to do so peacefully in this country. Rachel, thank you to you and the crew there on the scene these last 24 hours. Just really tremendous and careful work. Thank you. I want to bring in John Carl. One last question here, because as I mentioned, we are on the eve of the Republican National Convention. And John, there have been so many points along the way, a remarkable split screen of both of these campaigns and this deeply polarized moment in this country. That image moments ago where you saw President Biden inside the Situation Room, Vice President Kamala Harris at his side, learning details of these last 24 hours. There's the image on your screen right now. We know the president is set to address the nation in the next hour or so, about 1:30 Eastern. We will carry it live. You can see the vice president there and his national security team. And you also have former President Donald Trump and the Trump campaign signaling there will be no change. They will move forward with this Republican National Convention.
David, this morning, the former president spoke to the chairman of the host committee here in Milwaukee, Reince Priebus. The message from former President Trump is all systems are go. Do not scale back this convention one bit. He wants to charge ahead. He also described to Reince Priebus the scene that, from his perspective, at that assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, talking about the bullet piercing his ear, going down and being shocked that people didn't simply all run away, and the horror he felt that somebody just to his side who was just sitting there at his rally was shot and killed. But the message about the convention is this convention is going on, and I've got to tell you, this will be a highly energized convention. This will not be a toned down convention. Already you are seeing Republicans across the board, from the president's own family to party leaders, using that image of the bloodied Donald Trump, blood coming down his face, his fist in the air, as the symbol of their campaign, really as the symbol of the convention and of Trump's role in politics. So this convention is going to go forward. The question is what happens with the rhetoric, because you have heard from political figures across the political spectrum, from former President George W. Bush to former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi to the Speaker of the House Republican Mike Johnson, saying we need to tone down the rhetoric, we need to show respect and civility, and that violence has no place in politics. So we'll see what the rhetoric is here in Milwaukee, David.
And we'll be right there with you, John, in Milwaukee all week long. Appreciate it and appreciate your coverage on This Week this morning. We're going to be back on the air with President Biden as he addresses the nation about 1:30 Eastern, we're being told. As soon as he comes out, we will come back on the air. Our coverage will continue on a special edition of World News Tonight, Sunday. I'll see you a little later for that. And we should mention tonight that ABC News is putting together a special report, 8 p.m. Eastern. We will bring you up to date on the investigation, which, of course, is fast moving. You've seen that right here during this special report. The latest from former President Donald Trump, from President Biden, and what this is going to look like in this presidential race moving forward. Again, a special edition of World News Tonight Sunday, and then our 8 p.m. special report, bringing you up to speed with the latest on this investigation. I'll see you a little later today. Good day.
This has been a